She was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. The kind of beauty that made strangers pause mid-sentence, that made mothers pull their daughters close and whisper warnings about vanity. But what happens when the very thing the world celebrates about you becomes the thing that destroys you from the inside? What if your reflection stopped showing you what everyone else sees and started revealing what you've been desperately hiding? This isn't just about beauty. It's about the terrifying moment when the mask you've worn for so long finally cracks, and the person staring back at you is someone you don't recognize anymore. Adaeze Okonkwo was 28 years old when she first noticed something was wrong with her reflection. Not wrong in the way you'd expect, not a blemish or a wrinkle or the cruel march of time. No, this was different. This was the kind of wrong that makes your blood run cold, that makes you question whether you're losing your mind or if something far more sinister is happening. She stood in her bathroom that Tuesday morning in her Victoria Island apartment, mascara wand frozen halfway to her lashes, staring at the woman in the mirror who looked back at her with eyes that seemed just slightly off, a smile that didn't quite match her own. For 3 full seconds, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because the reflection had blinked a half second after she did. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Adaeze had always been beautiful. That's not vanity speaking, that's just fact. By the time she was 16, modeling scouts were approaching her mother at their fabric shop in Yaba. By 21, she'd done campaigns for 3 major beauty brands across Lagos. Her Instagram had 200,000 followers who dissected every angle of her face, every product she used, every filter she swore she didn't need. Her boyfriend, Chukwemeka, a banker with kind eyes and a patient smile, told her at least once a week that she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Her best friend Ngozi said it too, though sometimes Adaeze caught something else in Ngozi's voice when she said it, something that sounded almost like pity. But Adaeze had learned early that beauty was currency, and she'd been spending it wisely her entire adult life. Free drinks at upscale bars in Ikoyi, better tables at restaurants, job offers that had nothing to do with her mass communication degree from the University of Lagos, forgiveness for being late, for forgetting birthdays, for the small cruelties that beautiful people are somehow permitted. She'd built her entire identity on the architecture of her face, on the way light caught her cheekbones, on the perfect symmetry that made photographers sigh with relief. But lately, something had been shifting. It started small, the way these things always do. 3 months before that Tuesday morning, Adaeze had been at an art exhibition in Lekki, wearing a dress that cost more than most people earned in 3 months. She was talking to a potential client, a woman who owned a chain of high-end salons across Lagos and Abuja, when she caught her reflection in one of the gallery's floor-to-ceiling windows. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, the woman looking back at her seemed different, older, harder. The smile on her reflection's face looked cruel in a way Adaeze had never seen on her own features. She blinked, and it was gone. Just a regular reflection, beautiful and familiar and safe. She blamed it on the gallery lighting, on the 3 glasses of champagne she'd had on an empty stomach, on stress for the marketing campaign she was managing. But that night, lying next to Chukwemeka in their apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that some invisible line had been crossed. The incidents became more frequent after that. A week later, brushing her teeth before bed, she saw her reflection's eyes track movement behind her a split second before her own eyes did. 2 weeks after that, trying on clothes at an upscale boutique in the Palms, she watched her mirror image frown while she herself was smiling at the sales associate. Each time lasted only a moment. Each time could be explained away. Bad lighting, fatigue, the stress of managing Chukwemeka's growing suspicion that she was working too much, caring too much about appearances, losing touch with the girl he'd fallen in love with 4 years ago at a friend's wedding in Enugu. But Adaeze knew, deep in that place where we keep the truths we're not ready to face, she knew something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The Tuesday morning when her reflection blinked out of sync was different because Adaeze couldn't explain it away. She'd had 8 hours of sleep. The bathroom lighting was the same expensive setup she'd installed specifically because it made her look flawless. She was stone cold sober, hadn't even had her morning tea yet. And there it was, undeniable and impossible. Her reflection was moving independently. For 3 full seconds, they stared at each other, Adaeze and the woman who wore her face, and in that moment Adaeze understood with perfect clarity that she was looking at something that was not her. Something that was wearing her appearance like a costume. Something that knew she'd finally noticed. The reflection smiled then, a smile Adaeze hadn't made, and there was triumph in it. The mascara wand slipped from Adaeze's fingers, clattered into the sink, and when she looked back up, her reflection was perfectly synchronized again. Normal, innocent, as if nothing had happened at all. Adaeze told Chukwuemeka that night. They were having dinner at their dining table, the one they'd picked out together at a furniture store in Ikeja, back when they still did things like shop for furniture on Saturday afternoons. Chukwuemeka was talking about a difficult client at the bank, something about foreign exchange transactions, when Adaeze interrupted him. "I think something's wrong with me," she said, and her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Chukwuemeka put down his fork, concern flooding his features. He was a good man, Chukwuemeka. Maybe too good for someone like her. Someone who'd been coasting on beauty for so long she'd forgotten how to be anything else. She told him about the reflections, about the wrongness she couldn't quite articulate. She watched his face carefully as she spoke, watched concern shift to confusion, then to something that looked uncomfortably like worry. Not worry for her situation, but worry about her mental state. "You've been working too much," he said carefully, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Maybe you should take some time off. Talk to someone. Maybe see Dr. Adelik." Dr. Adelik was his therapist, a woman Adaeze had met twice at dinner parties and found insufferably calm. But Adaeze didn't need a therapist. She needed answers. That night, after Chukwuemeka fell asleep, she sat in the bathroom with her laptop, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Reflection moving independently. Mirrors showing different image. Seeing things in mirrors. The search results were useless at first. Mental health forums. Horror movie fan sites. New Age nonsense about spiritual entities. She was about to give up when she found it, a blog post from 7 years ago, written by a woman named Kayamika Nwosu. The post was titled, "When Beauty Becomes a Cage," and as Adaeze read it, her hand started shaking so badly she had to set the laptop down. Kayamika described everything Adaeze was experiencing. The delayed blinks, the independent movements, the sense of something else looking out through her reflection. But Kayamika went further. She described what came next. How her reflection started appearing when she wasn't looking in mirrors. How she'd catch glimpses of herself standing in places she hadn't been. How the reflection started doing things, making decisions, living a life that Kayamika had no control over. The blog ended abruptly. No final post. No resolution. Just a comment from someone claiming to be Kayamika's sister, posted 2 years after the last entry, asking if anyone had information about Kayamika's whereabouts. She disappeared from her home in Port Harcourt, just vanished one day, leaving behind an apartment full of covered mirrors and a note that said only she won. Adaeze didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark living room, listening to Chukwuemeka breathe in the bedroom, watching the windows for any sign of her reflection. Because that's what Kayamika's blog had made her understand. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't stress or mental illness or too many late nights at the office. This was something else entirely. Something that had been building for years, fed by every time she'd chosen appearance over substance. Every time she'd used her beauty to manipulate or control. Every time she'd looked in the mirror and felt that surge of satisfaction at her own reflection. She'd been feeding something, strengthening something, giving power to a version of herself that existed only in glass and chrome and any reflective surface. And now it was strong enough to move on its own. Strong enough to want things. Strong enough, maybe, to take her place entirely. The next morning, Adaeze called in sick to work at the advertising agency where she was a senior account manager. She needed to understand what was happening, needed to find Kayamika, or someone who knew what Kayamika had known. The blog had been posted from Port Harcourt, but the comments suggested Kayamika had family in Enugu. Adaeze spent 6 hours tracking down information, using skills she developed in her marketing career for digital investigations. She found Kayamika's sister on Facebook, a woman named Amara who lived in Enugu. Adaeze sent her a message, trying to sound rational and sane while asking about mirrors and reflections and a blog post from 7 years ago. To her shock, Amara responded within an hour. "Call me," the message said, followed by a phone number. Amara's voice on the phone was tired, worn down by years of something Adaeze couldn't yet understand. "You're experiencing it too," Amara said. It wasn't a question. "My sister disappeared 3 years ago. The police in Port Harcourt ruled it as a voluntary missing person. But I know what happened. The mirror took her." Adaeze's mouth went dry. "What do you mean, took her?" Amara was quiet for a long moment. Kayamika figured it out too late. The reflection, the other version of yourself, it gets stronger every time you prioritize appearance over everything else. Every time you choose beauty over kindness. Every time you use your looks to get what you want instead of earning it. It feeds on that energy, grows more real, more substantial, and eventually it becomes real enough to step out of the mirror, to switch places with you. Adaeze's voice came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible." Amara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know it's not. You've seen it." Kayamika saw it too. By the time she understood, it was too late. She called me one night from Port Harcourt, terrified, said her reflection had started appearing everywhere. In car windows, in phone screens, everywhere. Said it was watching her constantly. Then one morning, someone who looked exactly like Kayamika showed up at her job, at her apartment, living her life. But it wasn't her. Her eyes were different. Cold. Well, I confronted this thing wearing my sister's face. It just smiled at me. Said Kayamika was somewhere she couldn't bother anyone anymore. Said this was her life now. Adaeze hung up the phone and immediately went to the bathroom. Her reflection looked normal, perfectly synchronized with her movements. But when she stared into her own eyes, she saw it. A flicker of something else. Something aware. Something patient. "What do you want?" she whispered to her reflection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, deliberately, her reflection smiled while Adaeze's own face remained neutral. The reflection's mouth moved, and though no sound came through the glass, Adaeze could read the words on her own lips in the mirror. To be real, Chukwuemeka found her 3 hours later, still standing in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. "Ada, you're scaring me," he said, and there was genuine fear in his voice. She turned to look at him, and in his eyes, she saw her own future. He would make her see Dr. Adelik. Dr. Adelik would diagnose her with something, put her on medication, maybe recommend hospitalization at one of the private clinics in Ikoyi. And while she was medicated, while she was vulnerable and weak, the thing in the mirror would grow stronger, would find its moment, would take everything. "I need to fix this," Adaeze said. Chukwuemeka reached for her, but she stepped back. "Fix what?" "Baby, you need help. Professional help." But Adaeze was already moving past him, grabbing her phone, her keys, her wallet. She had to find answers, had to find a way to stop this before it was too late. Over the next week, Adaeze watched helplessly as small things began to change. Ngozi called her, confused, saying she'd seen Adaeze at the Eco Hotel having lunch with clients, but when she'd waved, Adaeze had looked right through her. Chukwuemeka mentioned that he'd run into her at the bank branch in Aja, but she'd seemed different, more confident, almost cold. Each time, Adaeze had been somewhere else entirely, nowhere near those locations. The reflection was getting stronger, appearing in the world without mirrors, living moments of her life, taking over piece by piece. Adaeze knew she had to act. She spent 2 days covering every mirror in the apartment with black cloth, every reflective surface, every window. When Chukwuemeka came home and saw what she'd done, he stared at her for a long moment. "I can't do this anymore, Ada," he said quietly. "I love you, but I can't watch you destroy yourself like this. I'm going to stay with my brother Obinna for a while. Please get help." He packed a bag, and when he left, there were tears on his face. Adaeze wanted to call him back, wanted to explain that she was fighting for her life, but how could she make him understand? For 5 days, Adaeze lived in darkness, avoiding all reflections. She didn't check her phone, didn't look at screens, didn't go near windows. And slowly, gradually, she felt something shift. The constant awareness of being watched faded. The weight she'd been carrying lightened. On the 5th day, she carefully uncovered one small mirror. Her reflection looked back at her, normal and synchronized. Relief flooded through her. She'd done it. She'd weakened the connection. But her relief was premature. The next morning, her phone rang. It was her boss, Emeka, and his voice was cheerful. Adaeze, fantastic work on the Guinness campaign yesterday. The clients were impressed. You were on fire in that meeting. Adaeze's blood ran cold. Sir, I wasn't in the office yesterday. I've been sick at home all week. There was a long pause. Adaeze, you were definitely here. We had the meeting at 2 p.m. You presented the entire strategy. Are you feeling all right? Adaeze hung up and immediately called Ngozi. Ngozi, have you seen me this week? Ngozi laughed. Of course. We had lunch at Cactus on Tuesday, remember? You were telling me about that trip you're planning to Dubai. Ada, what's going on? You're acting strange. But Adaeze hadn't had lunch with anyone. Hadn't been planning any trip. The reflection had stepped fully into her life. It was going to work, meeting friends, living her existence, and doing it better than she ever had. Adaeze tried to go to her office the next day, but security wouldn't let her pass. Madam, you already signed in this morning at 7 a.m., the guard said, confused. She tried to explain, tried to prove she was the real Adaeze Okonkwo. But how do you prove you're yourself when another version of you is already inside, already accepted, already living your life? She called Chukwemeka, desperate. Emeka, please, you have to believe me. Someone is impersonating me. But Chukwemeka's voice was distant, careful. Ada, I had dinner with you last night. You came to Obina's place. We talked about you getting help. You seem better, more grounded. And now you're calling me with this again? I think you need to see Dr. Adelik. Today, Adaeze realized with horror that the reflection had even visited Chukwemeka, had convinced him it was getting better, had secured his trust while making Adaeze herself seem unstable. She was being systematically erased from her own life. She called Amara back, Kayamika's sister, her voice breaking. It's happening, just like your sister. It's taking everything. Amara's response was quiet, sad. Kayamika tried to fight it, tried to prove she was real. But the reflection was better at being her than she was. In the end, my sister just disappeared. I don't know if she ran away or if something worse happened. But Adaeze, there's something Kayamika wrote in her journal before she vanished. She said the only way to destroy the reflection is to destroy what created it. To completely let go of vanity, of the identity built on beauty. To become someone the reflection cannot imitate, because you're no longer the person it was modeled after. Adaeze sat in her cover apartment and understood what she had to do. The reflection existed because of who she'd been for so long. It was built from years of choosing appearance over substance, beauty over character, surface over depth. To defeat it, she had to become someone completely different, someone the reflection couldn't be. She walked to the bathroom, picked up scissors, and looked at her covered mirror one last time. Then she began to cut her hair. Not carefully, not stylishly. Just cut it short, ragged, removing one of the features people always complimented. It was the first step in dismantling the person she'd been. Over the next month, Adaeze transformed herself. She stopped wearing makeup entirely. Started dressing in simple, unremarkable clothes bought from Tejuosho Market instead of the designer boutiques she'd frequented. She moved out of the Victoria Island apartment into a small room in Surulere, a neighborhood she'd once considered beneath her. She started volunteering at a local primary school, teaching children to read, doing work that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with substance. The reflection could have her old life, her job, her friends, even Chukwemeka. Adaeze was building something new, something real, something the reflection couldn't touch because it was built on who she was, not what she looked like. But 3 months after she'd started this new life, there was a knock on her door one evening. Adaeze opened it to find herself standing there. The reflection, wearing her old face, her old confidence, her old beauty. They stared at each other for a long moment. "You think you can escape me by changing how you look?" The reflection said, its voice cold and sharp. "I am you, the real you, the you that matters." Adaeze shook her head slowly. "You're who I pretended to be, but I'm learning to be who I actually am. And the more real I become, the less real you can be." The reflection's confident expression flickered, just for a moment. "Look at your hands," Adaeze said quietly. The reflection looked down, and Adaeze saw shock cross its features. The reflection's hands were becoming slightly transparent, flickering at the edges like a bad television signal. "The more I let go of vanity, the less you have to exist on," Adaeze continued. "You were built on my superficiality, my need to be admired. I'm not that person anymore. So what are you now? What do you reflect when there's nothing to reflect?" The reflection's face twisted with rage and fear. "You can't do this. Without me, you're nothing. You're not special, not beautiful, not worth anything." And Adaeze smiled, genuinely, perhaps for the first time in years. "I know," she said, "and that's exactly what makes me free." The reflection lunged forward, its hands reaching for Adaeze's throat, trying to force its way back into connection with her. But Adaeze didn't fight back. Instead, she closed her eyes and let go of everything. Let go of the fear, the need to be beautiful, the need to be admired, the entire identity she'd built on appearance. As she released it all, she felt the reflection's grip weaken, felt it becoming less substantial, less real. She opened her eyes to see it flickering, fading, like morning mist under the Lego sun. "I forgive you," Adaeze whispered. "I forgive you for existing because I created you. And I forgive myself for creating you." The reflection stared at her with Adaeze's own eyes, and for just a moment, there was understanding there. Then it dissolved completely, leaving Adaeze standing alone in her doorway, breathing hard, but finally, truly alone in her own life. 6 months later, Adaeze got a message on Facebook from Amara. "I don't know if you'll remember me, but I had to tell you. My sister Kayamika came home last week. She just appeared at our family house in Enugu, looking completely different, saying she'd been on a journey. She won't explain everything, but she's real. She's really back. And I wanted to thank you because somehow I think what you did helped set her free too." Adaeze stared at the message for a long time, then wrote back, "Tell Kayamika she's not alone. Tell her the hardest part isn't defeating the reflection. It's learning to live as yourself afterward. Now let me ask you something. How much of your identity is built on what others see when they look at you? How often do you perform for the world instead of being yourself?" Adaeze's story is extreme, impossible even, but the truth at its core isn't. We all create versions of ourselves for others to see. We all cultivate appearances, manage how we're perceived, perform for audiences. The question is, how much of the real you gets lost in that performance? And if you stripped away everything you use to define yourself, the beauty, the success, the image you've carefully built, would you still know who you are? Think about that the next time you look in a mirror. Ask yourself, are you looking at yourself or at a reflection you spent years creating? And which one is more real? Which one would you choose if you had to pick between them? Because someday, in some way, we all have to make that choice. We all have to decide whether we'll keep performing or finally step into who we really are underneath. What would you choose?